Your gut microbiome is one of the most powerful systems in your body. It influences your weight, your hormones, your energy, even your mood. In this episode, we'll look at the groundbreaking advances in gut research and what they mean for your health today. In 2014, I actually wrote this book, The Belly Fix, and talked a lot about what it meant to have a healthy gut because a lot of my training was in Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, along with, of course, traditional medicine and functional medicine. And all of these systems of medicine talked about the gut in some respect or the other. But the difference was in Eastern medicine, most Eastern systems of medicine, the gut is ground zero of your health. And it was true 5,000 years ago and is still true today. And in 2014, we were just starting to use the words microbiome, gut health, and these things like kefir and kombucha and kitchery and all the things that I was talking about back then were very foreign, honestly. People were just starting to wrap their heads around this idea. Well, what happened with this book was that people that followed this plan did amazingly well. They lost weight, they talked about having incredible mental clarity, and so many other benefits. And so it only reinforced this idea that the gut is such a critical part of our health. Now, it's been almost a decade or so later, right? And there have been so many advances when it comes to the world of gut health, the microbiome, and what it means for so many other processes and systems of the body. In this next episode, we are going to break down the important elements of gut health, what a healthy microbiome really means for you, and what the research is saying when it comes to gut health, the microbiome, and what it means for everything from weight to depression to hormone health and so much more. All right, let's get into it. I want to start with really talking about what does a healthy gut look like. I feel like we're using the word #gut health and all these things over and over again, but what do we mean? What are we talking about? There are a couple of critical elements to gut health, and it's important for all of us to be aware of them to start to have this conversation around a healthy gut microbiome. First, let's define microbiome. A microbiome is that sea, that population of bacteria swimming around in the gut, all responsible for different things. Think about a massive factory and everybody has a job. One set of bacteria may have a job for your metabolism, another one for your hormones, another one for your kidneys, another one for your blood sugar, and I could go on. And what we thought was just the gut microbiome, we are now understanding is not just limited to the gut. Your rectal area, your vagina, your mouth, your organs, everything has a microbiome. But at the end of the day, the gut is still ground zero for all the other microbiomes in the body. So for this conversation, we're going to talk about the gut microbiome, advances in the gut microbiome, and what you really need to know. So we know the microbiome is a critical element of health, but the microbiome, which I'll keep referring to, is essential and dependent on a couple of other key gut functions. The first of which, it really wants a healthy gut lining. Now, I've used this analogy before, but I want to think about your gut, starting at the mouth, going all the way down to the rectum, and being one continuous massive organ. And in Chinese medicine and older systems of medicine, they actually threw the liver and the gallbladder into this overall sort of analogy of gut health, right? So all of it's the gut, and all of it has a microbiome. But for it to function effectively, you have to have a healthy gut lining. So it's this idea that the gut lining has to be intact, has to be non-permeable, and has to do what it's supposed to do in terms of absorption of all the amazing food that I know you guys are eating. If that lining is not intact and instead you have something that looks like someone's like punched holes through it, right? I always talk about maybe like a laundry bag or a trash bag where there's someone's just punched a bunch of holes through, then you lose your nutrients, and that in turn triggers something that we've talked about for a long period of time called leaky gut, which in turn sets the body up for inflammation. Now, conventional traditional medicine doesn't recognize leaky gut, but we're splitting hairs here, guys, because instead they want it to be called intestinal permeability. And each of us has a different level of intestinal permeability. Now, if you're running a high-stress life, you're eating a lot of fast or ultra-processed foods, if you're on a lot of different medications, or you're taking in things that are harming the gut lining, including alcohol, or a lot of diet sodas, or carbonated beverages, all of these can impact the integrity of that gut lining and lead to leaky gut. And leaky gut, in turn, triggers microbial instability. So patients will come to me all the time and be like, do I have SIBO? Do I have Candida? What do I have? And the answer is we have to look at all of it, because if we in isolation treat SIBO or treat Candida over here, but don't treat the entire gut holistically, it's going to come right back. And we've seen that over and over again. SIBO, by the way, is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, is what we refer to as SIBO. And conventionally, we treat SIBO with 14 days of antibiotics called Xifaxan, and it works. But again, if you don't heal the gut in its totality, then it will come right back. And I've seen that in practice over and over again. So we need to have not just a healthy gut microbiome, but we have to have a healthy gut lining. But there's two other parts to this story as well. You have to be able to digest the foods that you're eating. So having the right proportion of digestive enzymes and having enough hydrochloric acid is important for a healthy gut and healthy gut microbiome as well. One of the things that we see for people who are on a lot of medications or who've had a lot of procedures or who are aging, right? Their ability to produce digestive enzymes and hydrochloric acid actually goes down. So in turn, their ability to digest their foods, even though their diets sometimes are like impeccable, is impaired. And that in turn triggers a shift in the microbiome. So that's another component of this healthy gut. Moving on from that, what is the other critical piece of a healthy gut? Well, it's the ability to produce bile. That's right. We need the gallbladder. The gallbladder produces bile, emulsifies fats, helps to package them, and sends them off to where they need to go. Without the right production of bile, what we see in turn is a lot of fat malabsorption, meaning you're spilling fat in your stool, which in turn looks like issues with your hormones and issues with your neurotransmitters, including dopamine, GABA, and serotonin, which means you become hormonally depleted, anxious, depressed, all the things, and it's all happening right here in the gut. So needless to say, understanding what is going on with the gut and how that influences the microbiome is ground zero for health. When I talk about any condition in the exam room, you find me winding my way back to the gut as a starting point. And oftentimes on those initial visits, as we're trying to problem solve, we often begin with a gut protocol first. Now that you have a feeling for what the gut looks like, what's involved, what the critical functions are, let's dive deeper into what's happened in the world of microbial research. I want to talk about what's happening both in the exam room and also what's happening in research. A healthy gut microbiome is so important for overall health. And in the next few minutes, we're going to connect how important a good gut microbiome is to many other aspects of your health. The research is fascinating. What we're seeing in the exam room supports it. It's still not yet, quote unquote, a standard of care, but I'm so excited to share some of this information with you. Now, we've already reviewed what a healthy gut is, right? You have to have a good gut lining. You have to have the right amount of enzymes. You have to be able to produce bile acid. And of course, you have to have the right bacteria. All of this is sort of dependent on the production of two particular molecules. I could almost reduce it down to having the right amount of butyrate. Butyrate is produced from fat. That helps to balance all of this, and having the right amount of something called Beta-Glucuronidase. Beta-Glucuronidase is an enzyme that's responsible for taking things up that we eat, taking up our hormone metabolites, our toxins, recycling them, and moving them out of the body. But when beta-glucuronidase is too high, then it moves it right back into the bloodstream. So this balance of butyrate and beta-glucuronidase is kind of at the center of this tug and pull of what the gut microbiome is going to do, along with the other factors of gut health. A healthy gut microbiome, when butyrate is in the right place, beta-glucuronidase is in the right place, is composed of diverse bacteria. In fact, the more diversity, the better. We want lots of different types of bacteria floating around in our body because, again, remember, they all have different functions. So when we go and sample the gut microbiome in practice, right, we have many different ways of doing that through stool tests and breath tests and understanding what gut bacteria is doing. Here's what we like to see. We like to see a healthy population of lactobacillus bacteria. bifidobacteria, ruminococcus bacteria from fiber, bacillus bacteria that's been tied to many different conditions, and Akkermansia, which has been tied to blood sugar. All these different strains of bacteria have different jobs, but when they're in the right amount, they work to prevent things like inflammation, hormone imbalances, mental health disorders, and so much more. But when they're out of balance, that's where we start seeing expression of different diseases. I'm going to break down for you some of the connections that we have seen both in research and in the exam room between gut bacteria and health. Let's go for it. Let's start with the first one. The first one is the gut-brain axis, right? So in this particular article, it's talking about how we understand that certain gut bacteria are responsible for production of the neurotransmitters dopamine, GABA, serotonin, and even norepinephrine and epinephrine. Studies show that almost 90 to 95% of your neurotransmitters are packaged and made in the gut. So we know that there's a huge connection between the gut and the brain, and we've seen this over and over again in practice. This particular study from 2022, and this is where I get excited because the research is evolving, right? It's not all, from the past, and there's so much more coming out every single day, says this: the gut microbiome exerts a considerable influence on human neurophysiology and mental health interactions between the intestinal microbiology and the host system. And it's played a role, they're talking about the gut microbiome again, it's played a role in the development of psychiatric conditions and how effective medication and therapy may actually be. So this particular article is a review of what's happening to date, but saying that we're still falling short because when we are treating a mental health disorder like anxiety or depression, or bipolar, any of these things, we're not thinking about the shifts in gut health and the shifts in the microbiome. So if I had my way, when we did a holistic approach, right, to a mental health disorder, we would work on the microbial shifts, the integrity of the gut, while we also thought about medication, hormone balance, and then other modalities like cognitive behavioral therapy or therapy. So again, we kind of do a disservice when we take just do this one thing and you're going to be better. Now, the gut has also been implicated in inflammation. In fact, I often find myself saying the root of inflammation is in the gut. Here's an article again talking about, this one's from 2023, talking about something that's fascinating. It's called the exposome. Have you guys heard of that before? The exposome is actually the cumulative load of all the toxins you've been exposed to and how that influences the microbiome. So here we're talking about now the exposome, which is the sum of human environmental exposures, including diet, drugs, and toxins impacting tissue homeostasis, including what the intestines are going to do and how the gut lining will or will not stay intact. Basically, we're understanding that the disruption of that gut lining from whatever your exposome looks like is going to influence inflammation. And inflammation at the end of the day is the thing that is developing and driving tumors and cancer in the body. Again, this article is from 2023 and really linking together that cumulative load or the exposome with the microbiome, with inflammation, and then how it might be linked to cancer. Such an important connection, and one reason, especially as we see cancer rates go higher and higher, that we really need to be paying attention to gut health when it comes to inflammation, because inflammation is the number one trigger for most chronic disease today. All right, there's the gut inflammation connection. Let's do one more. The gut hormone connection. All right, now this is a big one. In fact, I had a diagram here. I'm going to show it to you. You probably can't see it, but we'll put it up there. This is the gut hormone connection. Essentially, what they're showing here is that within the gut, you have the microbiome. It's responsible for having healthy bacteria. Those bacteria between butyrate and beta-glucuronidase are responsible for taking up things like estrogen and testosterone. And what's actually happening in perimenopause and menopause and many other hormone conditions, even andropause in men, is that as the hormones decline, the ability of this gut bacteria to stay balanced goes down. And as that goes down, what we then see is there's a lot more recycling of hormones and dumping them back into the bloodstream or not excreting them the way they need to be, resulting in estrogen dominance, androgen dominance with declining levels of testosterone and estrogen. So again, we can see how the gut is involved in this really important conversation. And as women go into perimenopause and menopause and men go into andropause, the reason many of them are having issues from mood to weight and so much more is because the gut is not doing the job it was doing because the hormone influence has changed over time. So again, the interconnectedness of all this stuff is absolutely mind-blowing. So we've talked about the gut hormone connection, we've talked about the gut inflammation connection, we've talked about the gut-brain connection and what it means to have a healthy gut and how to keep these different strains of bacteria balanced. Let's move on and talk about a few other patterns that we really need to understand when it comes to gut health and a healthy microbiome. One of the most exciting areas that we are starting to understand when it comes to healthy microbiome and advances in the microbiome is the connection to weight and metabolic health. One of the most exciting things when I wrote The Belly Fix in 2014 was that when people did the plan, they lost so much weight and they didn't expect it. And they had tried every other diet plan in the world. Well, as the years have passed, the connection between a healthy microbiome and your weight continues to be very clear. And in fact, there's some exciting work being done really tying, if you could balance the microbiome in a particular way, could you finally lose that belly fat and lose weight effectively? The research continues to evolve, but what we see in practice are a number of patterns tying back to gut health and insulin regulation and blood sugar balance. Now, the most known, well-known pattern is a lack of a bacteria called Akkermansia. Akkermansia has been shown in research and even in practice to really help with uptake of blood sugar, bringing insulin levels back down, and indirectly helping with the situation around weight. Gut bacteria are responsible for our metabolic rate, and oftentimes I have patients that have done everything, right? They are, doing the diet, they're doing the exercise, they are trying to figure out why they simply cannot lose weight. Well, when it comes to weight and weight loss, I remind everybody that the gut is a primary metabolic engine. And if it's not working well, it is very difficult to lose weight. You often know that your gut's not working well with obvious gut symptoms, right? Reflux, bloating, trouble going to the bathroom. But another way to know that the gut's not doing well are symptoms that are more silent or more subtle, whether it's rashes or brain fog or simply feeling ill after eating or crashing after eating. The connection between blood sugar and the microbiome is so strong, and it is so regulated by the food we consume, but also by our stress levels and our sleep. And article after article keeps bringing this connection back into the forefront. So Akkermansia is one bacteria that we could take to help rebalance this pattern, but it's not enough to just do one particular bacteria. There are a couple of other bacteria involved, and they tie back to our diet. For example, ruminococcus is a bacteria that's produced when we eat enough fiber. If we're not eating enough fiber, then we see the population of ruminococcus get out of control and not be able to do the things it needs to do. So fiber becomes very important when we're thinking about weight loss and blood sugar regulation. The other bacteria really involved in this weight equation when we think about the microbiome is Candida, or an overgrowth of yeast in the gut. Many times when there's a lack of microbial diversity, and what I mean by that is that we're either not eating a variety of foods to give us different bacteria, or we're not eating high quality foods, or there's been a shift downward for different reasons. And one of the reasons we know that we lack diversity sometimes is in a hormone condition like andropause, perimenopause, or menopause, where there's simply not as many good gut bacteria as there were at one time. And that in turn is a primary driver for the weight gain that you see with hormone shifts. So for example, when hormones shift in these life stages, or even with something like PCOS, for example, then we know that there is a change in what's happening in gut bacteria. And what many researchers are trying to do is isolate, if we gave you a particular probiotic in your state, in your hormone state, would that shift you back to where you used to be? Or would giving you the right hormone shift you back to where you used to be? But for people that are gaining weight and that are frustrated and not understanding the why behind it, a big part of the why is simply that they do not have the bacteria that they once had, and they have to work actively on repopulating it. So there's definitely a connection between the two. When I look at the studies and just review it, they talk a lot about this connection between the microbiome and metabolic syndrome. And they're saying the interplay of the microbiome with the host and your metabolic rate includes many factors, including how effective your gut barrier is, how much bile acid, remember we talked about that, you're secreting, if you've been on excessive antibiotics, because that in turn makes candida worse, and then what's happening with the different metabolites that you're producing. In addition to that, diet and circadian rhythm are influencing your gut health and your microbiome as well. That's a more evolving area of research that I think is super fascinating, that the circadian rhythm, meaning your sleep-wake cycle, right, determines so much, not just your hormone rhythm, because there's such a player there when it comes to your hormones. Your circadian rhythm is actually directly influencing your microbiome. So if your circadian rhythm is off, maybe you travel a lot, maybe you're in different time zones, maybe you're a night owl, or you have erratic sleep schedules because of shift work or so many different reasons, or young children even. Part of the reason you're having trouble with weight is because that gut bacteria is not stable. It is also shifting and actually becoming less and less diversified because of the disruption in circadian rhythm. All right, let's look at this article from 2022, talking about what they are seeing when they look at circadian rhythms and the gut microbiome. And what they're saying, they're showing an increase in body weight when there is a decrease in what they're saying a regular, consistent night schedule. It's saying the alterations in the expressions of these clock genes, that's what they're causing it, is relevant for metabolic functioning. And what they found was a bidirectional relationship between the microbiome and your clock, right? So if you are on a consistent sleep schedule, going to bed at the same time, waking up at the same time, you'll have microbial regularity. If you're somebody that's not sleeping consistently because of travel or because of the other things that we've mentioned, then you're going to have issues with your microbiome. And that microbial disruption in turn leads to weight gain. And that's a connection that's really important to understand, because I think one of the things we're not doing in practice and that we need to start thinking about is kind of profiling each of our patients, right? Do I have a traveler? Do I have a stressed mom? Do I have somebody doing shift work? Do I have a night owl? And then helping each of you move your sleep schedules to one that's realistic, but then also supporting that schedule so that you can maintain things like microbial regularity and hormone regularity as well. And I think that's a really important piece of the puzzle. There's been a lot of discussion, especially with the advent of GLP-1s, on the gut microbiome, the gut in general, and insulin and metabolic rate. And GLP-1s do help people lose weight. The concern we have with long-term use of GLP-1 medications in the context of a healthy gut microbiome is that we don't want to disrupt the gut. And that is the biggest flaw of those medications, that when they are given at doses for a long period of time, or you assume that you have to be on this forever, how are we impacting the gut microbiome over the long term and making sure it's not moving in a direction for decreased diversification, decreased butyrate production, and abnormal levels of something called Beta-Glucuronidase that drive the body towards a pro-inflammatory state, a hormone-disrupted state, and a state where metabolic syndrome is a reality. This is what we need to be thinking about when we think about overall health and a holistic approach to health. We have to be thinking about how do we maintain a diverse, healthy microbiome. And that's what we're going to do next over the next few minutes. All right, from gut brain to gut hormone to gut inflammation to gut weight. 4 critical ways that your microbiome is impacting your overall health. We've talked about the connections, we've talked about the strains of bacteria involved, and we've talked about the importance of a healthy gut lining, production of digestive enzymes, bile acids, and even the bacteria that are acting together in concert and in balance. What we want to do next is build a plan that works, right? Build something that's realistic. We can get into the research and you can get into all the strains, and sometimes it's so interesting from an informational standpoint, but it's not really practical from a day-to-day standpoint. It's part of why I love merging the research with clinical practice, because in practice, we get to work with people day in and day out at Whole Plus and get to see what works, what doesn't work, what is maybe too academic, and what really might be a solution for the future. So here's what we have seen work consistently over and over again. Maintaining a healthy microbiome, one that is consistently stable and can withstand environmental pressures, hormone shifts and changes, life stressors, no matter what they may be, and different stages of life, is one that pays attention to those four critical components: the gut microbiome, the gut lining, digestive enzymes, bile acid production, butyrate, and beta-glucuronidase, right? We want to pay attention to all of that. I always put beta-glucuronidase and butyrate as sort of subcategories of the four main ideas. And the way to go about doing that, you have to talk about diet, right? Because I always say you can't out-supplement an unhealthy diet. So we want to start with diet and make sure you're doing a couple of key things for a healthy gut when it comes to your diet. Number one is you're removing processed and ultra-processed foods, right? Fast foods, packaged foods, anything in a bag. And the reason for that is the chemical load and toxin load in those foods, and sometimes the saturated fat load in those foods, are affecting our four key determinants of gut health and impacting butyrate and beta-glucuronidase. So cleaning up the diet, starting small then big, right? I always say start with lowering alcohol first, lowering your consumption of sugar, trying to get that down to maybe 1 or 2 days a week, under 4 drinks of alcohol a week. That's a great starting point if you don't know where to start. Then kind of graduating out of that and moving to, okay, I'm going to reduce other inflammatory foods, diminishing dairy, diminishing gluten, and then keeping animal protein down to about 4 to 6 ounces a day is ideal when we're talking about the gut microbiome. The next piece of this is preserving that gut lining by taking in something like collagen, right? You can do Collaglow. There are so many different collagen products on the market, but doing a scoop of that a day can help preserve that gut lining, as can one of my all-time favorites, glutamine, and I usually recommend doing about 2 to 3 grams a day. In addition to that, taking digestive enzymes. And this is one I can't stress, over and over again. I find myself talking about this because remember, digestive enzymes are going to prevent that concept of fat malabsorption. So as your hormones change and your gut just kind of gets sloppy and sluggish, those enzymes are improving the efficiency of your digestion. And there's some enzymes that actually have ox bile in them that actually also help with sort of the gallbladder production and then helping to produce the bile that's needed to package up and move your food in the right direction. So digestive enzymes become critical, hydrochloric acid becomes critical, and then I start with a broad-strained, at least 100 colony count probiotic that can help to provide some diversification to the gut. We need a range of bacteria in the gut to begin with until we can identify if there's one particular bacteria that you're having trouble with. And when we take this initial approach, we are usually able to get the microbiome back in balance and subdue things like candida or ruminococcus overgrowth or streptococcus overgrowth that we see in menopause. We're able to bring those things down. But if we're not, then we start to look for strains of bacteria, and this is where the research is headed, where we can actually treat. So, for example, we would take a sample of your stool, we would evaluate it, and then we would be able to formulate and develop a probiotic or a prebiotic or even a symbiotic that works with the deficiency to re-diversify and repopulate your gut bacteria. Now, repopulating the gut bacteria can be done with taking probiotics. Probiotics do need to be high quality. They need to be vetted to make sure they are what they say they are, because as they sit on a shelf, they do degrade over time. That's why some people actually even prefer prebiotics, which is the food that a probiotic will feed on to have diversification. But there are a lot of fun hacks that you can bring in that actually help you to diversify your gut bacteria. And this is bringing in those fermented foods, right? Bringing in the yogurts, the kefirs, the kombuchas. I had fun making kombucha at one point, but those are things that do help to diversify that gut bacteria and make the gut much more efficient so it can do what it needs to do with hormones, inflammation, weight, your mood, and so much more. That's one way of adding diversification. The other way is one that I have to be honest, even I have trouble with, is switching up your foods, like changing up what you're eating, like not having the exact same breakfast every day and the exact same lunch every day, kind of switching it up a little bit so that you're getting different bacteria from every different food you're eating, so that's another way of promoting diversification in the gut. And finally, looking at your sleep, your stress, and your hormones is a way to get your gut bacteria back in line. Remember, this stuff is bidirectional. One thing over here is influencing another thing over here. But when we're not sleeping, as we've seen in the studies with circadian rhythm, or if we're excessively stressed, high cortisol will slow down gut motility and change what the gut bacteria are actually doing. Then in turn, we're impacting the central idea of gut diversification and those 4 critical elements of the gut. So that's another place where we can jump in. This is why acupuncture has been a game changer for the microbiome, or something like consistent massage might change the microbiome, or getting off of night shifts can change your health completely because it shifts the microbiome. We've even seen this with hormone replacement therapy. So going on a little bit of estrogen, but making sure it's not getting recycled to cause estrogen dominance can help the gut bacteria. So all of this stuff is interconnected, intertwined, and you can be actionable when it comes to repopulating and diversifying your gut bacteria. And when it comes to the research, there's so many incredible advances in the microbiome and what the microbiome can and cannot do. But at the end of the day, while research fights it out and tries to find the perfect strain for the perfect condition, I think it's our responsibility and what we do at Whole Plus to put the whole picture together and understand that your gut is a massive system with a lot of different parts and players. And when they work together in harmony and in symphony, that's when you achieve your best health. If this episode helped you, share it with a friend, subscribe for more, and visit wholeplus.co for my gut health resources.